It's Sunday, October 19th, and we have two isolated marginal risk associated with that same really big weather system that caused a lot of severe weather out here in the Mississippi River Valley yesterday. The main risk with this is going to be just a damaging wind threat, and this is actually going to be a pretty conditional damaging wind threat for both these areas, just a 5%. At the max, we're really only going to be seeing some 60 to 65 mile an hour damaging wind gust in both of these areas. Don't really think we're going to see an overperformance in either of these areas today either. And then there is actually a pretty isolated tornado threat down in the more southern portion of our risk, which kind of covers some areas in the Gulf Coast like parts of the Florida Panhandle. Just a 2%. I don't even really think we're going to see anything over a spin up tornado, if that. And once again, this is a really conditional risk. I would not be surprised if we don't see any tornadoes or even any tornado warnings down here at all today either. And then for hail risk, there is actually nothing at all. This is just kind of because we're in a specific region of the US where hail isn't really as prevalent, and we're having a bunch of just primarily linear and messy storm modes, which are just not supportive of that at all. But starting in the more southerly risk that we have, we're going to notice a couple of things. Of course, we have that really big squall associated with that trough and cold front from yesterday. That's going to continue to push out east and then bring some more severe weather. Just going to be a damaging wind threat at that point. And then we're going to see a really strong area of confluence out here in the Gulf. We have some storms kind of initiating all the way up this. I think one of the reasons why there is a conditional tornado threat is because some of these storms from this confluence line kind of slamming into this larger squall could potentially increase the threat momentarily for a spin up tornado. Then also these storms kind of along this confluence line have a much more unimpeded area of inflow to them from some warm, moist air in the Gulf. That just increases that threat of tornadoes in general. But because these storms are going to be so early in the morning, it looks like the ingredients, other than shear, aren't really going to be that present, making this threat for severe weather and tornadoes pretty slim. It's not zero, but I really wouldn't be surprised if we saw no tornado warnings and we just saw a couple of severe warnings in this area. I think it's mostly just going to be special weather warnings, though. I don't really think we're going to be seeing that much severe weather in this area today, but at most, it's just going to be some gusty winds, maybe peaking at that 60 mile an hour range. And it looks like the main part of our risk is going to be done by midday. We do have a couple of sneaky things maybe getting started along the actual cold front, and then maybe some outflow from our original line getting going behind this. I think a lot of these storms are going to be kind of dealing with a environment that has already kind of been taken away by these storms in front of it. So I don't think we'll be seeing that much out of these, but there still would be a conditional threat for maybe some stronger thunderstorms with that. But that's really going to be it down here. I think everything's going to be pretty much done by nightfall. Now, moving a little bit more to our more northern risk area, it's definitely going to be a different look. One of the main takeaways is that we are going to have that pretty prevalent squall line along that cold front and then big trough. That's really going to stretch the entirety of our marginal risk area. And I think, once again, the main thing with this is just going to be a damaging wind threat. And if that's still going to be pretty conditional. It looks like it's going to be a very messy storm mode, which would just further kind of decrease how high that threat is. Don't really think we're going to be seeing anything over 60 miles an hour. And this threat is really going to start all the way from the morning, kind of stretching all the way until nightfall, or until this kind of big system moves off into the Atlantic Ocean. It looks like it's going to kind of remain as a somewhat strong squall all the way throughout this time. Now, of course, I think the strongest time frame is going to be in between around right before lunch to probably around the late-ish afternoon. But once again, just a very messy storm mode. We actually have this kind of line of confluence or just general troughing from a lot of convergence in front of this. That's going to be kind of taking away the storm environment for our main squall, really kind of lowering that risk even further. And then we can just see how messy it gets in the late afternoon. Just so much bubbly convection. I don't really think we're going to be seeing that much severe weather out here, but it still definitely is possible if you're in that marginal risk definitely want to stay on the lookout for those warnings from the National Weather Service. And here is the big guy that's really at fault for all this. It's just going to be this massive trough digging in from our jet stream, just causing a big widespread area of thunderstorms kind of stretching up the entire eastern coast. Quite a bit of forcing here, really. That's going to be the main thing causing most of our severe weather today. And starting with the storm environment down in our more southern portions of our marginal risk area today, it looks like we're going to have a couple of things favorable for some severe storms. Of course, we're going to have some pretty favorable shear parameters, 63 dew point. That's going to be a bit more favorable for some severe weather, and that's going to be because we're going to have a bit more of that unimpeded flow from the Gulf into our storms. Kind of the reason why there is that 2% tornado risk, but I think overall it's pretty close to zero, and I don't really think we're going to be seeing much of anything. As for other severe weather, because our shear parameters are pretty solid, we have quite a bit of forcing from that trough. That's why we could see maybe an isolated damaging wind threat, but overall our CAPE is going to be very, very low. It's going to be a pretty unfavorable environment for some storms, kind of stable all the way up in the atmosphere. Then another thing is our precipitable water is going to be quite high, 1 point around 8 inches. So that is something that could increase the threat of damaging winds. But other than our precipitable water and some really favorable shear parameters, that's pretty much all we have going for these storms today. But definitely still think there could be maybe a weak damaging wind threat. And then there is also definitely some parameters which could support the threat for maybe a weak spin up tornado. But I think that's going to be very conditional, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see any at all down in our more southern marginal risk. And moving up north, we do see a couple more things going for it. We have a little bit of a inverted V profile at the surface, maybe a tad bit more instability. Our 3 CAPE is actually going to be nearing 100 almost, and then our CAPE is getting a little bit above zero, still extremely, extremely low and a really stable layer from the first 1 to even 5th kilometer in the atmosphere. Now, one thing to note is that our shear parameters up here are going to be really solid, at least for organizational shear, around 60 knots. Definitely think that's going to be one of the main reasons why these storms are going to be able to sustain so long, even though the environment in front of them isn't really that great. Another reason why I think we're going to be seeing a couple of severe warnings for some damaging winds up here as well, even though these storms are going to be dealing with a lot of cooled air kind of going into them. That cool air is actually the main reason. Also, kind of the really stable environment in front of these storms as well is going to be the main reason why that tornado threat is going to be really close to zero, even though we have these really solid shear parameters, and even our shear vectors are kind of parallel to our line, which normally would kind of increase the knack for couple of spin ups in there. I definitely don't think the chance for a tornado is going to be completely zero up here in our northern marginal risk, but it's going to be really close to it because we're just going to be dealing with some cool and more dry air, just more stable air with our storms today. Really going to be hard for a tornado threat to get going. Definitely do think we could see maybe a damaging wind threat unfold. Not going to be really that high caliber of a damaging wind threat, though. I don't think we're going to be seeing anything over 60 miles an hour in either of our risk today.